Mushoku Tensei, Jobless Reincarnation, has had its share of controversies. Yes, clickbaiting, grandstanding individuals that just want to make everything that's in it painted as problematic. It shouldn't exist, and those that support this show support all manner of horrific things. They're pro this, pro that. Terrible people. The fandom is disgusting. While there is a legitimate group of people that do like the storytelling of Mushoku Tensei, despite its uncomfortable aspects, I think some get stuck on the controversial aspects rather than even acknowledging the positive. It's a weird thing that humans do. We see something positive happening and we just kind of shrug and assume that that's normal. They go on without a thought of it. But if something negative happens, if there's an existence of something negative, that's when we have to make our post on social media and tell the world what a morally good person we are because we acknowledge it. You're a good person. Good job. Something with Mushoku Tensei that was most evident here recently when we had pretty much 2 consecutive episodes of controversial content. Everyone threw hate at the show, said it was the end of the world, just to have a massively positive message in the following episode, and there's absolute crickets around it. Nobody wants to acknowledge something extremely positive came out of that next episode. Most reviewers that were upset at the previous episodes just basically wrote a synopsis about the following episode and just breezed over the positive messages in there, which, yes, is the reason for this video. Honestly, it's a lack of the attention to what good Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation does that shows who actually is invested in the story and gets the deeper meanings behind it. It's like they're not even trying. Yes, evident of hate watchers. So I want to highlight those moments covered in the anime so far. For all those individuals that want the show canceled, that its writing is horrible and it sits in nastiness for the sake of sitting in nastiness, let me tell you, Mushoku Tensei is extremely impactful. And honestly, more important than most every other story I've read. And the comments I've seen from people and how this story connects to them, helps them through hard times, and overall has a deep and impactful meaning behind it is immeasurable. So let's do this. Let's kick things off with Rudeus, our main character. Rudeus is a massive character study of somebody at his worst, yet not being a lost cause. Refugin, the author of the series, puts it best in his own words. I think the balance was right. Because he's a controversial character, his mountain of regrets makes the act of redoing his life more meaningful. Of course, I have no issues with criticizing Rudeus at the beginning stage, and it's up to you to decide whether you don't want to see the story because of that. With that said, if there's someone like Rudeus close to you, and that person were to have even a slight change of heart and try to start over, I sincerely hope that you won't abandon them on the spot. See, Rudeus highlights the underbelly of our own society. I mean, that's why a lot of people hate it. In his past life, he was somebody that had a great future ahead of him. He spoke out once in school to some rough guys, was bullied horrifically by people in his school, shut himself up contemplating his own end, rejected his family who didn't understand his pain, feared going outside and being hurt again, his own shut-in nature spiraling to the point of being heavier and heavier, and indulged in many things online, including explicit content. He's the people of society that we fail, and what he turned into is what society finds deplorable. We create people like him, and we don't want them to exist. And whether we want to believe it or not, many people echo his life. Yet we ignore them. Despite that, the story, Rudeus is given another shot. And while he holds on to these stains that he once had, he's better at many things that even we are. Sure, he fails, but I guess people like to make that the sum of everything that's about him. Ignore everything else. So they don't have to accept the fact that he's better than them in many ways. So let's examine how Rudeus himself brings about a positive message, because I'm sure there's some people waiting for that. Let's start with bullying. Rudeus' story gives us a harsh pill to swallow about how bullying can damage a person. He makes us self-reflect on how it can harm somebody, how the scars can remain on somebody. And if you're the one being bullied, gives you a little bit of a light to the scars that you have. There's elements of how someone bullied can often keep people at a distance, how encouragement or struggles can often compound those issues. There's no fix to bullying, but Rudeus is a prime example of the effects of it, and ultimately how some scars can never be healed. But it's possible to soften over time. He's basically a long road of recovery, and easily falls right back into it due to the trauma. While heavy, it can be relatable to so many people that suffer the same thing. Now moving on to the subject of a shut-in. Rudeus spent his entire previous life, and yes, some of this next life, as a shut-in. Something that, honestly, most people can't even dream of. But this is a reality for many people in Japan, and yes, is something that is growing even more so in other countries. It highlights a mental shackle that he tragically walked into. His fears caused by being bullied compounded on itself, causing him to dig deeper and deeper and deeper into this hole, to the point of no return. the anxiety itself becomes too heavy to bear. Despite being reborn, those shackles don't leave him. The idea of even going outside seems impossible to him. It seems so simple, and most people would laugh at it, but this is something that exists. This is an anxiety and a fear that a lot of people have. Then we have the tragic elements of, unfortunately, Rudeus wanting to end his own existence. Because of how Rudeus has suffered in his previous life, this unfortunately leads to his own thoughts of ending it all. This hatred for himself and fear of those around him, his failures, his inability to be an independent adult, a topic that is never comfortable, and something that even returns to his mind as he faces destroying his relationship with Edis, Sarah, Counter Arrow. Mushoku Tensei as a whole never shies away from people at their worst. People that may not see a light. A painful and relatable experience that deserves people's attention. Even if you're reading and watching it and you have not experienced that yourself, at least you can see the warning signs for those around you. And I feel that alone is enough to be said. Mushoku Tensei is a story about a society that failed him and a life of regret and pain. All these things mold Rudeus into his second try of life. And that's where we start to see the growth, the healing, the maturity, and the positive messages, yes, that people don't want to acknowledge that Mushoku Tensei does. The first big shift in Rudeus' outlook on life is when somebody finally reached out a hand that he could take. Roxy Magurdia. Knowing or unknowing, she gained his trust and comfort. She was the first person that he opened up to. Roxy unknowingly led Rudeus out of his comfort zone and destroyed 20 years of his imprisonment, thus saving him from another life of being locked up and fearing the outside world, breaking past those preconceived notions that he has on outsiders. While easy for everyone to leave their house on a daily basis, we go to the door, we open the door, we go outside, we get in our cars, we jump on our bike, we head to work. That is something many can't find the strength to do. And for Rudeus, it's the impossible. Downplay it all you want. This is hard for him. And if you find that that's comical, it's fine. Maybe you'll learn a little empathy here. This was huge. Now let's move on to Rudeus' experience with bullying and how that shapes how he acts around other people. Because honestly, it's not just about schoolyard bullying. It's the act of wrongfully harming somebody else when they don't deserve it. This is something that is in Rudeus' mind all the time. From the first moment that he meets Sylphie in Buena Village, he takes action. That's me right there. I have to stop them. As I mentioned earlier, he even equates it to the idea of supporting certain causes. A brilliant example of this being Rejuerd. Rejuerd told Rudeus his story, how he and his men were tricked to take upon themselves the spears. It cursed them and caused them to slaughter other people, and despite the fact that he got his revenge and took down their leader, the people still see Superds as the bad guys. And Rudeus doesn't like this wrongful treatment of the Superds. He wants to support Rejuerd in clearing his name. That leads him to trying to shatter hundreds and hundreds of years of prejudice against the Superds. Yeah, odd. Rudeus doesn't like prejudice. Sounds a little opposite to a recent article I read. Anyways, and yes, even currently in the anime at the university, Rudeus protects those being bullied, like Cliff and Zenoba. As I mentioned earlier, yes, Rudeus doesn't adhere to the long-standing prejudice within this world and the people that live within it. He doesn't fear or hate Roxy, Sylphie, Rejuerd, or others. People obviously of a different race. And yes, hair colors that signify demons, despite the fact that the world itself hates demons and looks down upon other races for the most part. Rudeus doesn't adhere to it. Then you have the aspect that Rudeus himself has no desire for violence, war, or bloodshed. This is evident when Philip himself was trying to get Rudeus to marry his daughter and get involved with this war between the families. He didn't want to get involved. He struggles constantly internally about situations that could lead to somebody getting killed. For instance, when Nokopara was going to expose them to the guild, Rudeus thought, I need to do something. I need to protect Edis, but I don't want to take a life. He even has the same struggle when he was talking to Rejuerd when they were talking about freeing the beast folk from the smugglers. Rudeus knew that these were bad guys, that they had to silence them if they wanted to free the beast folk, but he couldn't bear to stain his hands. Rejuerd had to do it. Rejuerd knew that he didn't want to do it. Even later on, when Rudeus blasts Bodigati, still in his mind, I don't want to take a life unintentionally. It's constant struggle in him. For all of his faults that people like to acknowledge, Rudeus doesn't like violence. He doesn't want to harm people, and he definitely doesn't want to kill somebody. He does have times where his hand is forced into violence, but he's not a killer. Like I said earlier, he aided Rejuerd in freeing the beast folk. He stopped the kidnapping and slaughtering of the Doldia village. When he seen kidnappings happening and the fact that they would be sold off into forced servitude, he took action, despite the fact that it was technically his father trying to free them, and it was a misunderstanding, he still took action. Rudeus, for all of his flaws that people like to point out, is a good person and does a lot more good than what most people would do in his situation. Additionally, Rudeus' character highlights different things like abandonment, fears, hurt, and rejection. The idea of him acting submissively around people in order not to get too close to them, but additionally not to be harmed by them. That timidness and that fear of being scarred again that most everybody can probably relate to. Shoot, he even opens up the door to the aspect of ED, which honestly, what story covers the absolutely emotional crushing aspect that comes from a man that cannot perform? What that does to you, how it affects your self-confidence and everything that you do, how it makes you feel like you're not a human. I don't even recall if I've ever seen a story that covers it in a serious manner. But Rudeus is not the only character that is flawed, sees growth, and sends a powerful message. His father, Paul Greyrat, highlights the mistakes parents can make, yet the struggle to do what's right. Following the displacement incident, he struggles over years with depression, fears, and anxieties in order to save neighbors and strangers alike. And yes, even making an enemy of himself to powerful nobles by trying to essentially kidnap from them citizens that were being forced into servitude. Paul also highlights the struggles that fathers have for their sons, setting expectations high, yet missing the point that a genius child is still a child. Paul and Rudeus' relationship, yes, while abnormal and thrown into chaos by the displacement incident, is still one that makes you realize the importance of each other, the strength and reliability of a father figure, and the happiness of the safety of your child that you love. These things that often make you forget what at its core is important, which was enough that makes that whole embrace that happens all the more impactful. That despite the mistakes you may have in connecting, it can still be remedied by simply having compassion for each other's fears. Paul, through and through, is a dirtbag. He's scum. He's a womanizer and cheater of a husband. But in the end, makes sacrifices to find his family and fights against powers that take advantage of a tragedy. Like with Rudeus, he starts as stained and becomes amazing. Let's move on to Rudeus, which is easily one of my most favorite stories of the series. Rudeus highlights a deep-rooted prejudice and desire to change the unchangeable. His tribe was tricked into madness, and the bloodshed he caused continues to haunt the name of his tribe. And while he fails to change that over hundreds of years, through Rudeus, he starts to heal those wounds. Not through violence and force, but purely through kindness. This is a massive uphill battle because everybody believes that the Superds did it on their own, and nobody has the true story of who actually caused it. He has been hated by society for so many years, and this is something that doesn't change overnight. But at least through Rudeus, he's sort of getting that chance, that opportunity, and that hope that one day people won't judge him because of what race he is, but who he is. Rudeus also highlights the importance of protecting those most vulnerable in our world. Yes, children. Merely kicking a child, this guy will kill somebody. Rudeus protects the smiles. Moving on to Roxy. Roxy explores the subject of pretty much stagnation and growth, and the inadequacy that's caused by those around you being more skillful than you are. She felt herself skillful in her craft, yet is completely outshone by a child, leading her to constantly question her own ability, doubt her own skills, feel like she's never gonna be good enough. Zenoba and Roxy pretty much highlight the aspect of children with special needs and feeling isolated from their community because of it. Roxy being completely unable to speak to her own kind. How her parents struggle to learn a language just so they can speak to her. And how even still, she feels like she's a burden upon that society. She feels like an outsider. She can't fit in. She can't understand their emotions and the way they communicate their emotions. Zenoba Sharon is, yes, technically also a case of that. A cursed child that is unable to control their own strength, and how it causes fears in those around him. How he unfortunately, unknowingly, when he was very young, takes the life of his own brother. How he's isolated from his family and nobody even tries to understand him. He was used at first, but then he's discarded to the side out of fear. Even Ghislaine's story hits on the idea of being rejected by her tribe. She's feral. Nobody can control her. She's violent. She's a violent little child. So they let her go. And she's always seen as sort of a stain upon the tribe itself. Until Ghislaine herself rises up. She gets stronger. She gets smarter. She leads a better life. Until the point where it shocks her own people. This is Ghislaine? You're talking about Ghislaine? That feral girl that everybody wanted to get rid of? She got smarter. She got stronger. She found a better life. Lilia is probably one of the most tragic stories. This is where you pretty much have somebody that has been pretty much had her life ruined, yet tries to rebuild it. Has a moment where she betrays her own dearest friend and holds that regret for doing that for so long of her life. Spending your entire life and even getting your own child involved for this redemption that you need so badly, despite the fact that the person that you wronged forgiving you. Ellen Elise is a prime example of the idea of not judging a book by its cover. Oh, it's the neighborhood bike. That girl that sleeps everywhere. And then as you get to know her more and more, you realize that first impression is completely wrong. This is somebody that is extremely caring, supportive, knows boundaries and relationships, and has a curse to contend with. Cliff explores the aspect of being talented and building up a boosted ego, only to have it absolutely trampled on, pushing yourself into self-reflection and growing as a person because of it. The desire to change the status quo in order to pursue one's dreams. And then we have pretty much the camels. And then we finally have the camels back here. The reason why I made this video. Yes, Ellen Elise and Cliff's love itself breaks societal and racial boundaries. Two different races coming together, accepting someone for who they are, despite their blemishes that others see. You don't want to be with her. She sleeps with everybody. You're somebody of the church. You can't accept her. And then from Ellen Elise's side, I can't settle down with anybody. I have this curse to contend with. I have to constantly be going around. This boy is too pure for me. They're the two people that shouldn't be together now come together, and nobody wants to acknowledge that. And finally, the last character I want to highlight is Rudeus, an example of a spoiled, violent child, raised and given everything that she wants, only to be faced with becoming a failure in the eyes of everyone around her, her family, everyone in her circles. A child seen as a stain on a family, and to never be a proper woman of status. She's given her last opportunity, which is in Rudeus, but then getting displaced, feeling that it's happening because she's being punished. And the entire time she feels inadequate. She can't stand by the side of Rudeus, this powerful mage, and Rejured, this amazing warrior. She feared being abandoned. She feared being left to die. The loneliness and fear that comes from losing everything you once had. Her story is essentially speed run, grow up, and it's terrifying for her. The displacement incident can sort of be equated to a natural disaster in our world. The idea that one day you feel like things are always going to be like this. I'm comfortable, I'm with the people I love, things are going well, it'll be this way forever. And then the next day, it's all gone. You're alone, you have nobody around you, you're isolated, you have fears about what's going to be next. You have fears about where everybody's at. You have fears about, is my family safe? In the end, Mushoku Tensei is a story of reality. A cast of characters that are morally unacceptable by today's Puritans. But for those willing to learn a bit about compassion, forgiveness, and maturity, it's a petri dish of development that many can relate to. Many can heal from. And the positive message that underlines that all becomes more impactful. And let me tell you, it only gets more impactful as it goes along. Because, as many can relate, some scars don't heal overnight. Some fears and regrets don't turn off like a light switch. Life is a series of learning experiences, and I commend the author for not giving up on Rudeus.